I woke up after 10 years in a coma, and the first thing I heard was my own wife laughing with another man in the hallway outside my room. I didn't know who he was yet. I didn't know a lot of things yet. My name is Alejandro Vargas. 10 years ago, I was 34 years old, sharp, ambitious, building one of the fastest growing logistics companies in Mexico City. I had a wife named Camila who I loved more than I knew how to say out loud. I had a best friend named Ricardo who I trusted with everything, including the company. I had a future that felt impossible to stop. Then one night, my car went off a highway overpass outside Guadalajara, and I vanished from my own life. When I finally opened my eyes in that hospital bed, 10 years later, thin as paper, muscles wasted away to almost nothing, the doctor stood over me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Relief, yes, but something underneath it, something cautious. He said, "Mr. Vargas, you're going to need to take things very slowly." I thought he was talking about my recovery. He wasn't. They told me it was a miracle. 10 years in a vegetative state, and here I was, talking, thinking, remembering. The neurologist kept using the word extraordinary. The nurses smiled at me like I was something they'd never seen before. Camila walked in on the second morning and burst into tears the moment she saw my eyes open. She grabbed my hand with both of hers and pressed it against her face. "Alejandro," she whispered, "I never stopped believing." And Ricardo, my best friend, my brother, the man I'd known since we were 19 years old, stood at the foot of the bed with tears running freely down his face, shaking his head like he couldn't find the words. I believed all of it. For exactly 3 days, I believed every single tear. Then the cracks started. Small things at first. The way Camila's phone kept lighting up with messages she'd tilt the screen away from me to read. The way Ricardo would glance at her, just a flash, barely a second, whenever I asked about the company. The way every question I had about Vargas Logistics was met with the same soft, practiced deflection. "Just rest, hermano," Ricardo said on the third evening, squeezing my shoulder. "The company is fine. Everything is fine. You focus on getting strong." I looked at him. "I just want to know the basics. Revenue, staff. Is the main depot still in Tlalnepantla?" He smiled, a little too easily. "All of that can wait." I nodded like I accepted that, but something in my chest had gone very, very still. On my 5th night in the hospital, I couldn't sleep. A nurse named Patricia came in around 2 in the morning to check my vitals. A quiet woman, mid-40s, with the kind of face that had seen too much to be easily surprised. She'd been kind to me in small ways. An extra blanket, a cup of tea nobody had asked her to bring. I asked her, quietly, if she could find me a newspaper. Any newspaper. Old was fine. She looked at me for a moment, then she nodded without a word. She came back with 3, folded under her arm like she was smuggling them. She set them on my bedside table, turned off the overhead light so only the reading lamp was on, and left without saying anything at all. I found it in the second paper. Business section, page 4. Vargas and Mendoza Logistics, named the 3rd largest freight operation in Latin America. I read that line 4 times. Vargas and Mendoza. Ricardo's last name is Mendoza. I had never, not in any conversation, not in any document, not in any dream I'd ever had about the future of my company, agreed to put Ricardo's name next to mine. Vargas Logistics was mine. I had started it with 1 truck, a rented phone line, and a storage unit I could barely afford. Ricardo was my operations manager, my friend, not my partner, never my partner. And yet there it was, printed in ink, completely matter of fact. I folded that newspaper carefully and slid it under my mattress. Then I lay in the dark and I thought about the way Ricardo had cried at the foot of my bed. And I wondered what, exactly, he had been feeling. On my 8th day, a man appeared in my doorway that I hadn't expected. Luis Ortega, my old financial director. A quiet man, meticulous, loyal in the way that only truly humble people can be loyal. Not because it benefited him, but because he simply didn't know how to be any other way. He looked older, heavier. His eyes carried something I recognized immediately. The look of a man who has been holding a secret so long it had started to physically weigh on him. He waited until the hallway outside went quiet. Then he pulled the visitor's chair close to my bed, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and spoke in a voice barely above a breath. Alejandro, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How much do you remember about the night of the accident? Not much, I said. A dinner meeting, getting into my car, headlights coming at me, then nothing. Luis nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. Do you remember what the dinner meeting was about? Something in the way he asked it made the air in the room feel different. A client, I said. A potential contract. Why? He looked up at me. Do you remember the client's name? I started to answer, and then, strangely, I couldn't. The name wouldn't come. The doctors had warned me there might be gaps. Isolated pockets of memory the brain had sealed off during the coma, like water damage behind a wall. Luis watched me trying to remember. It's okay, he said. That might actually be a good thing. Before I could ask what he meant, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Luis's entire posture shifted in an instant, spine straight, face neutral, voice rising to a normal conversational volume as he started asking about my physical therapy schedule. But as he stood to leave, he pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm and closed my fingers around it. A date, an address, and 3 words. Don't tell Camilla. The address was a storage facility on the industrial edge of the city. I got there 2 weeks after my transfer to the rehabilitation center, slipping away during a free afternoon, telling the staff I needed air. Luis was waiting at the unit with a padlock key and no expression on his face. Inside were filing boxes stacked floor to ceiling. 10 years of paper. Records, contracts, court documents, notarized amendments. All of it organized, labeled, preserved, like evidence. Because that's exactly what it was. How long have you been keeping all of this? I asked. Since year 2, he said. When I realized what was happening and understood that if you ever woke up, you were going to need proof. He pulled a specific folder and laid it open on a folding table. Look at the date on this document. It was a shareholder restructuring agreement, 18 months after my accident. My signature on the last page. My signature on a document that was signed while I was in a coma. I felt something cold move through me. Camilla had power of attorney. She did, Luis said, and for the first year she used it normally. Bills, medical decisions, keeping the company running. He turned to another page. But in year 2, small transfers started. Reclassifications of assets, minor enough to look like standard accounting. And then in year 3, he placed another document on top. Ricardo was granted a 49% stake in exchange for what they called capital injection and continued leadership. He bought into my company. Yes. With what money? Luis was quiet for exactly long enough to make my skin prickle. That, he said, is the question that keeps me up at night. I made my decision that night. I was going to go home, smile, accept the dinners Ricardo brought, let Camila fuss over my recovery, and I was going to watch them both like a camera recording every frame. It was the hardest performance of my life. Camila had redecorated the house. New furniture, different paintings, a kitchen renovation I didn't recognize. She explained it cheerfully. I needed to do something with my hands during all those years. You know how I get. And I nodded and said it looked beautiful. Ricardo came for dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He'd bring wine, tell stories, make Camila laugh. And there it was, that ease between them. Not the ease of 2 people who had grieved together, something warmer, more private, the kind of comfort you build in rooms where nobody else is watching. One Thursday evening, I came downstairs earlier than they expected and stopped just outside the kitchen doorway. Ricardo's voice, low. He's asking more questions about the depot figures. Camila, he's just disoriented. The doctor said, Camila, he's not disoriented. He never was. Silence. Then her voice, barely audible. What do we do? I walked into the kitchen, smiled, asked if dinner was ready. They both smiled back. And somewhere beneath my ribs, a cold and very precise kind of anger began to take shape. Luis called me 3 days later. He'd found the source of Ricardo's money. "You need to sit down for this," he said. "Tell me." "The capital Ricardo used to buy into the company. It traces through 3 shell companies to an account controlled by Felix Garza." The name hit me like stepping into cold water. Felix Garza. I knew that name. I knew it because 7 years before my accident, Garza had walked into my office with an offer that would have tripled our revenue in 12 months. And I had walked out of that meeting and told Ricardo the same afternoon that no amount of money was worth doing business with a man who used freight routes to move what Garza moved. Ricardo had agreed completely. "Absolutely, hermano. We don't need that kind of money. We're better than that." "Luis," I said, "is the company currently working with Garza?" A pause. "Vargas and Mendoza has been one of Garza's primary logistics partners for the last 8 years. I sat with that for a long moment. My coma hadn't just been an opportunity for Ricardo. It had been a requirement. I called Ricardo that evening and kept my voice completely even. "Ricardo, I think I'm ready to come back. I want to see the offices, feel useful again. Can we make that happen?" His answer came just a half second too quickly. "Of course, hermano. Friday morning. We'll make it a proper welcome." "Perfect," I said. "Just you, me, and Camila. I don't want a big production." "Whatever you want." I texted Luis immediately after. "Friday, boardroom, bring everything." Friday morning, my boardroom, my table. My name still first on the company letterhead, even if everything else had changed. I sat at the head. Ricardo took the chair to my right, not the chair at the opposite end. A small choice, instinctive. It told me everything about how he saw the hierarchy now. Camila sat across from me, still and composed, her hands folded on the table like she was attending a routine meeting. Luis set the folder down in front of me and stepped back. I opened it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply placed each document on the table, one at a time, and named it as I did. Shareholder Amendment, Year 3. My forged signature. Ricardo shifted. "Alejandro, that's not..." "Shell company transfer record. This one connects to Garza's holding account." "You don't understand the full picture." "Vargas and Mendoza logistics contracts. 8 active agreements, all running Garza's freight." The room went quiet. Ricardo tried denial first, then justification. Someone had to make decisions. The company would have collapsed. I did what I had to do to keep it alive. The words came out rehearsed, like he'd practiced them. But Camila said nothing. She sat completely still, looking at the documents on the table, and something in her face had changed. The composure was gone. What was underneath it looked less like guilt and more like exhaustion, like a woman who had been holding her breath for a decade and had just decided to finally stop. "Camila," I said, "tell me what you know." She looked up at me. "You need to understand what was happening before the accident, Alejandro." And then she told me. I had walked into that room believing I was the victim. I walked out of it understanding that the truth was something far darker, and that part of its darkness had my own fingerprints on it. 3 weeks before the accident, Camila told me, she had discovered something I had hidden from everyone. 2 years before my car went off that overpass, I had made a private deal with Felix Garza. Not freight, not contracts, money laundering. Off the books, untraceable, routed through subsidiary accounts I had created specifically for that purpose. I had told myself it was temporary, a bridge, just enough capital to survive a difficult quarter. But Garza doesn't do temporary. When he came back demanding more routes, more volume, more access, I had panicked. I had gone to Ricardo privately and told him everything. I had asked for his help finding a way out, and Ricardo had smiled and said he'd handle it. What he actually did was go directly to Garza. He offered himself as a more cooperative replacement. He agreed to everything Garza had wanted from me. And then, in exchange for his loyalty, Garza's people had arranged an accident on a highway overpass outside Guadalajara. Not to kill me, That's what Camilla said. It was meant to be a warning. It had just gone too far. Camilla had known all of this by year 2, and she had stayed, not out of love or loyalty or denial. She had stayed because Ricardo had made it very clear that the only people Garza punished more harshly than those who defied him were the families of people who talked. She had visited me every month for 10 years, not because she was waiting for me to recover, because I was the only place in her life where I felt safe enough to breathe. "I'm sorry," she said, and she wasn't looking at Ricardo. She was looking at me. "I should have found a way to tell you sooner. I just didn't know how." The room was completely silent. Ricardo stared at the table. The federal prosecutor's office took Ricardo into custody 5 weeks later. The Garza connection unraveled quickly once the right documents were in the right hands. Luis's decade of careful record-keeping turned out to be exactly the kind of evidence that moves cases from theory to conviction. Garza's operation took longer. These things always do. Camilla cooperated with everything, testified against Ricardo, testified against Garza's people, signed every paper they put in front of her. I don't know what to do with that. I've been trying to figure it out every night since. Because here is the thing I keep coming back to. None of it. Not Ricardo's deal, not the accident, not 10 years of my life disappearing. None of it would have happened if I had not made that first choice in a quiet office with Felix Garza sitting across from me. I told myself it was survival. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it wouldn't touch the people I loved. Ricardo betrayed me. Garza's people put me in a coma. But the door they walked through? I left it open. I got 10 years of silence and a body that barely worked. And somewhere in all that time, in whatever part of my brain was still running, I think I always knew the truth was going to be this. I just never expected it to be about me. Honestly, I still don't know where the guilt is supposed to land. On Ricardo, who chose a criminal over his oldest friend? On Garza, who took a decade of my life without blinking? On Camila, who knew and stayed silent, and somehow I still can't fully blame her for it? Or on the 34-year-old version of me who sat in that office, looked at Garza's money, and made a calculation? There's one thing that still keeps me awake at night, though. One question nobody has been able to answer for me. The dinner meeting. The night of the accident. The client whose name I still can't remember. Luis says he doesn't know who it was. Ricardo's lawyers say it's not relevant. And Camila, the one time I asked her directly, looked away from me for just a second before she answered. She said she didn't know. But I've spent 10 years learning how to read faces in a place where I couldn't move or speak. And I know what it looks like when someone is choosing their words very carefully. So tell me, what do you think really happened that night on that highway? Was it a warning that went too far? Was someone trying to get rid of me permanently? And do you think Alejandro deserved any of what happened to him? Or is the man who starts the fire responsible for everything it burns? I want to know what you think. Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one, and some of your takes are better than anything I could have written. And if stories like this keep you up at night the same way they keep me up, the kind where every answer just opens a darker question, subscribe, because I have more.